I just want to make a slight correction. I was with Crossref, and I am no longer with Crossref. But hello, I am Geoffrey Bilder. As was mentioned, I was the Director of Technology and R&D at Crossref for a number of years. And I've been working in scholarly infrastructure and technology for about 20 years. I've been involved in the design, development, and launch of a number of the identifiers, PIDs, that you've heard about today, including ORCID, ROAR, which is the research organization identifier, open funder IDs, and I've also been involved in a lot of STM initiatives, serving on STM technical committees for a number of projects there as well. I'm here to talk about, well, first of all, secondly, thank you very much for inviting me. JST and STM. I've never, in my extensive travels in this industry, managed to visit JST in Japan. So I'm thrilled at least to be able to do it virtually from here in France. I'm going to talk about whether or not identifiers are needed when we have AI. And this is a question that a lot of people are asking about a lot of things. That is, will these things that we consider to be essential now still be needed as AI becomes more advanced and is used more widely in scholarly communication? And I'm very grateful to previous speakers, Heather in particular, who gave a very good overview of what persistent identifiers are, and who gave examples of some persistent identifiers and talked about what persistent identifiers are used for. And I anticipated that the previous speakers would probably talk about the well-known applications of persistent identifiers. And those generally have to do with, as you've already heard, discovery and evaluation of the research process and making the research process and the evaluation of research more efficient. And those are very important applications of persistent identifiers. But I often think that they overshadow what I think is the most important aspect of persistent identifiers, and it's always been an important aspect of persistent identifiers, and it's going to become more important, I think, in the future. And that is how persistent identifiers can be used to establish trust in content, to evaluate content to determine whether it's trustworthy. Now, again, I think we're probably all familiar with the difficulties of consuming the vast amount of research output that is produced every year. And I want to give you an illustration of how metadata and persistent identifiers help us navigate and understand that research and identify research that is important for us to pay attention to versus research that we can ignore because it's not up to standard or it's not relevant. In order to do this, I'm going to play a game, and it's a little bit difficult to play this game when I'm not there in the audience with you, because normally what I'd be asking is asking the audience to participate in this. But I've played this game often enough that I'm pretty sure I know how you'll react when you see this. And so even without your direct feedback, I can I think I can anticipate what you'll say. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you a document. But in that document, I have blanked out, I have removed all the text. And here is that document. Now, if you look at that document for a few seconds, I know that you are all researchers or work with researchers, and you're going to be able to look at this document and know that this is not a newspaper article, that this is not a pamphlet. You're going to look at this, and without being able to read it, you're going to be able to tell me that this document is a research article. Even though you can't read the text, even though you don't even know what language the text is in. And I want to talk to you a little bit about why you're able to do that. And you might not have even been known you were able to do that, but it's an important thing, and I think it will play into highlighting the importance of metadata, and in particular, how metadata is going to also be important for machine readability and for a world where AI is consuming content. Let me continue with this game by pointing out that not only can you identify this as a document and this document as a scholarly article, but if I point to particular parts of this document, you're going to be able to tell me what they are without even being able to read the text. So if I point to this part and I were there and I asked you, can you identify this? All of you would nod and you'd say, yes, that's the title. It's clear that that's the title. If I were to point at another part of the document like this, you would say, yes, that is the authors and affiliations. Now, think a little bit about how you know this, what it is that it has allowed you to tell this. A lot of people don't realize that they're able to recognize these parts of a document so easily, so quickly, and that they're able to use this technique for immediately determining whether an article is a scholarly article or not. I could continue with this. For example, if I point up at the top here, you could tell me that that text is the name of the journal, the volume, the issue, possibly page numbers and things like that. Now, when I reveal the text, you can see that you were right. This is the classic shape of a scholarly article, and you were able to identify all of the important parts of that scholarly article without being able to read the text, without knowing what language the text was in, without knowing whether the text was, whether the article was in biology or physics or social sciences. And what this does is, I think it illustrates the power of conventions in presenting content and metadata across disciplines and across countries, that you are able to look at that and determine all of these things immediately. You can also do this for other parts of the article. So if I showed you this and I told you that and I asked you what kind of a document this is, you'd also say that it was an article, and you'd also be able to identify these parts of the article. It's at the other end of the article, it's at the end, but you'd be able to identify this section as references, and you'd be able to identify this section as acknowledgments. And again, if we reveal it, you'll see that that's the case. Now, why is this important? It's important because all of those things that you were able to identify are things that allow us to do what some people call lateral reading. And lateral reading is a mechanism that information professionals use, whether they're fact checkers or scholarly researchers. But lateral reading is a mechanism that professional researchers use for evaluating content even before they read the content itself. I'm going to talk about a little experiment that you can play. It's a little anthropology experiment, if you will, or sociology. I'm not sure which now. And this is the experiment. If you're in a city or a town and you're close to a university, go into the bookstore there and watch people and how they interact with books on the bookshelf. If you see a person go up to a book and take it off the shelf and flip it to the back to read the description of the book and maybe open it from the front to start reading, you'll know that that person is not an academic. They're not a researcher. A researcher they'll take the book off the shelf, and the first thing they'll do probably is open it to the bibliography to see if they're cited. They'll look through the index to see what topics are covered and whether it's relevant. They may then flip to the start and start scanning through in a highly efficient way to look at graphs, charts, headings, chapter headings, and things like that. That's how they determine very quickly whether or not that book is relevant to them. They don't read the content, they look at the metadata, and they look at it and they understand it in context. So what they're looking at are these elements. They're looking at where the content came from. They're looking at who authored it and what their affiliations were. They're looking at what the content refers to. What does it cite? They look at who funded the research that allowed the authors to produce the content and who they acknowledge for that funding. All of this is context. And professional researchers look at context before they look at content in order to determine whether or not they're going to actually read the content. And there's a very good reason for this. And that is that the context is usually recorded as metadata, and it is discrete. That is, it's individual small facts that a person can quickly determine the accuracy of. They can look at the title, they can look at citations, they can look at authors. Those are simple facts about the content. This is a lot faster and a lot more efficient than actually having to untangle the narrative of the content itself, of having to interpret the article. It gives us a quick way to determine whether or not it's worth our time to consume that article. Now, if you look at that context, and this has been talked about before by previous speakers, it usually lists a bunch of things that we consider important when we're trying to determine whether we want to invest the energy in reading something. It includes information about collaborators. It includes references to other material that support or the claims, whether it's data or other articles. It includes information about funders. It includes information about organizations, the affiliations of the authors who wrote the content. It may link to particular resources. So, for example, model animals or other things that were used in the research. There's a huge collection and variety of of metadata that's all interconnected, that helps us to evaluate it. And it's not just the quantity or the number of metadata elements that are important. It's that each of these metadata elements also has a time aspect, that is a history. So it's not just that you look at one of the authors of the paper. You'll often know who that author has collaborated with in the past and who those collaborators have in turn collaborated with. So you can look at a history of what the author has done, who they've done it with, and that also helps you to contextualize things. The same thing is true with affiliations. You can see who the author is affiliated with now, who they were affiliated with in the past, and that helps you understand whether the content, the author and the content might be something that you want to invest time in. Now, this sounds like a lengthy, difficult process, but this is stuff that researchers do instinctively. You've been trained for so long to do this that you hardly even think about it. This is just a natural way that you sift through mountains and mountains and mountains of publications to determine which ones are worth paying attention to and which ones are worth reading. That is basically about trust. And one of the things that persistent identifiers do with metadata is they help you to reduce ambiguity. They help you to be more precise. They help you to avoid confusion. And that's why this industry and this community has spent so much time creating identifiers for those important parts of a document that you scan first and that you look at first. We have ISSNs, we have ORCIDs, we have clinical trial IDs, we have resource IDs, we have digital object identifiers and PM IDs and archive IDs for citations. We have institutional RORs, that is, organizations that are designed to record affiliations. But now, increasingly, you'll also see that we have RORs for funders and grant IDs as well. And what these identifiers allow us to do is to automate and make more efficient some of that evaluation process that we've done before, because those identifiers can be linked to each other automatically. And those identifiers can be looked at and verified to see whether they actually exist, to see whether the thing that the person said they were citing is in fact says what they said it said. I apologize to the translators for that sentence. And of course, again, there's a history of connected ORCIDs and a history of associated RORs. So what does this have to do with AI? Well, first of all, identifiers allow you to automate a lot of these kinds of things. And if there's one thing that we've seen with current AI applications, is that it's often very, very difficult for us to understand how they came to the conclusions that they came to. We've probably all had this experience where we use one of the large language models, GPT or Claude, or perhaps a more specialized one, and we ask it the question, and it gives us an answer, and our first thought is, how do we know that's true? Where did they get that Where did it get that information? And it's been incredibly frustrating because not only do some of these tools not provide that contextual information, but sometimes they invent it. So we've all seen examples, and I've read stories about how one of the classic failures of a lot of current large language models is that they'll invent, or as people like to say, hallucinate citations. They'll create what looks like a legitimate citation to a legitimate article, and it turns out that either the article doesn't exist or the article says absolutely nothing having to do with the reason that it was cited. Now, think a little bit about this, because one of the things that these organizations that have built these LLMs are discovering is that all along they had a mechanism for determining whether a citation actually exists, and for determining and following it to find out whether the content that's being cited actually supports the assertion. And that is an identifier, a DOI, an archive ID, a PMID. There are lots of citation identifiers out there, and these tools, up until fairly recently, had not been making use of these. So one of the things that identifiers can do is that they can help AI tools to avoid these kinds of hallucinations and falsehoods, and provide the people who are using them with actual references that will work and that will link to the content upon which the assertions made by the LLMs were made. So this is one example. You're going to see this. AIs, they hallucinate and invent authors. They hallucinate and invent affiliations. They hallucinate and invent journal names. But all of these things can actually be verified using existing infrastructure that we've built up over the past 20 years to assist researchers with some of these same problems, which is, how do you navigate and contextualize content so that you know that it's trustworthy? So this is my basic message about persistent identifiers, is that they're about trust. That is their strongest application. That's where they're going to become even more important with the development of AIs and machines consuming content. Persistent identifiers are about trust. Thank you very much.